The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
And good afternoon, everybody. This is Derek Krebs with the MSX Group, and today we're going to look at one of our Prospero educational series items. Today's focus is on Prospero budgeting for driver-based modeling. I'll spend just the first couple of minutes with introductions of myself and today's agenda within PowerPoint, but the bulk of the time I'll be spending in the application. So I see a nice group audience today. We have both existing Prospero customers and secondly, some prospective customers and partners. So welcome one and all. All right, just the first couple moments here in the PowerPoint. Introducing myself and the MSX group. My name is Derek Krebs. I've been a consultant for the past 25 years, and 15 of those years, the first is where I and the majority of the founding staff at the MSX group, we all started at FX Software and Microsoft, where we worked for the first 15 years. And then as we got acquired by Microsoft, we helped develop, implement, and support those flagship products, like on the reporting side, Microsoft FX and Manager Porter. And secondly, on the budgeting side, Microsoft Forecaster. So 10 years ago, we released to the market the Prospero application, which instead of having two separate applications, two separate processes, is now one cohesive tool and application and process to make that more efficient for you. So welcome one and all. And I always like to emphasize I'm a consultant. I'm not the sales and marketing guy. So today's session, I'm just going to reflect on some of the past experiences I've had with our Prospero client base with the Prospero application, just to share some little tips. And today is one of many sessions that we have on Prospero. I'll pull up our website in just a minute for some other webinars and forums we have upcoming. But for those of you on today's phone call that are new or not existing Prospero customer, I'll just take a quick moment or two just to confirm that yes, indeed, Prospero does the financial reporting and budgeting, what I call general ledger data and non-GL data. I did a session earlier today of the top 10 features of Prospero for reporting to make your life easy. So that'll be a nice recorded session along with this one that we'll share for those that have attended and registered for today's session and out on our website for others to download at your leisure here. On the reporting side, it has all the additional bells and whistles that for your goals and requirements. Interactive charting and graphing / dashboarding, drill down to the account and transaction detail, electronic secure, and very user-friendly rows, columns, and trees, and even the migration ability from your existing FX and Manager Porter and Forecaster setup. So you do not have to reinvent the wheel. And just one or two quick little bullet points on the reporting side. So all flavors of reports, income statements, balance sheets, statement of cash flow, audit reports, etc., including, again, the transaction and drill down ability. As you can see, some graphing and dashing we're in there in the background. I'll save that for a future session. And today's focus is on the budgeting side. And what I like to do is accomplish several goals in today's session. Yes, the main focus, driver-based budgeting, but I'll also pepper in some of my favorite features to get out of Excel hell, as many of you might be transitioning from old spreadsheet style Excel painful ways of doing so. And within Prospero, we have all of the supporting schedules / backup or drivers behind your budgeting needs. A couple of those might be staffing, like human resources detail of dollars, not only headcount, FTE, but related benefits. Secondly, it might be on the capital side, needing to do some equipment, software, manufacturing equipment. Maybe third example might be some of my revenue and cost of goods sold detail down to customers, products, salespeople. So possibilities are endless on such. So Prospero gives you the control of that process and automatic consolidation of such. And now the last slide here is just going to be talking about some of the key concepts I'll address today on Prospero's budgeting, what we call, again, driver-based modeling, or at least my title for today's session on such. And 5 primary topics I'll look to. One would be where we're going to maximize our dimensions we have in the system We even could perhaps consider adding some, and then additionally, some additional dimension members, like perhaps new accounts for statistics for head count, units sold, etc. Second item, we'll take a little closer look at what we call book codes, like maybe actual read directly from your general ledger along with budget, but most people leverage the budgeting ability within Prospero to avoid double the work or Excel pain points. So we'll look to those book codes, and then we can also create additional book codes easily on the fly. Third item, we're going to spend most of our time looking at budget data entry and the simple components like a line and column that comprise that screen. You might have a default line set that all your departments might use, what I call a cookie cutter, one single line set that might serve your need and purposes, but we easily have what we call overrides where I can have maybe unique line set. Maybe one is for my general administrative departments that has expenses only in it. Or maybe a second line set or override might be for my sales department with some different accounts, statistics, or formulas there. Fourth item and keyword I just noted was formula. So we'll look closer at the formula abilities within the system, starting with some of the more common, easy, and basic formulas, and then some less common ones. Keywords there would be perhaps a qualified formula, where if it's this one line sheet shared by everybody, maybe I don't want the same formula to apply to maybe my Denver area versus San Francisco, so I can have an easy qualifier to restrict that formula to not be broadly used. Most common ones, yes, are. And then additionally, we're going to look at single cell calculations. And then finally, the fifth major key concept today is we're going to look at what we call a lookup formula, where I might have two departments, Department A or Department B, and maybe Department B wants to look up data from Department A. Maybe Department A is where I enter my sales data, maybe Department B is expense only, so I can easily look up data across a single or multiple departments. And sort of what I phrase a bottom-up approach or a top-down approach you could do in your design. And one sort of confident statement I like to make of the product and our experience with is there's really not been a budget model from a customer or client that I've not been able to produce within the system due to its power and flexibility. So we welcome all your questions today. There is going to be a question area I'll have you take advantage of. And then toward the end of today's session, I'll be glad to field those. I might be able to answer some of those online here. Sometimes I have a quieter, shy audience that's more just being sponges and absorbing it. But if there's instances where I need to punt the ball and field your question offline, I'll be glad to do so. And I'll be sure to wrap up with my contact information as well. But how about on that preceding slide, I'll just maybe quickly go back to, just to share that one more time. My email is derek.krebs@msxgroup.com. So please, again, don't be shy and ask some questions either now or afterwards. I'll be glad to help, again, bring the easy button to your processes here. And now, without further ado, I'm going to now spend the rest of the time inside the application. I just came off of a reporting session. So what I'm going to do is start there. I even demonstrated on an earlier call today, maybe log in as a power user, which I'm currently now as, versus maybe an end user that they have limited access rights and super simple for the end user. But today's session is more focused to the power user. So here to the left in my navigation pane, I have various links. I'm currently in the report area, looking at an actual versus budget report, maybe variances where I can maybe annotate, drill down, count transaction level, graph, send it to Excel, all that fun we have on the reporting side. But on the budget side, let's take a look now to what we call our input area, or otherwise known as our input definitions. Now, I want to emphasize a couple of key things that maybe most of you might know being existing customers, but for those that are newer prospective ones, one is all of this budget data is stored real time in the Prospero data warehouse, just like our actuals are read from your general ledger. An earlier word I sometimes like repeating, key concepts or abilities in the product, is non-GL data. couple of those might be maybe budget I'm talking about now, only stored in Prospero. Second might be statistical data, not only budget like headcount units sold, but that could also be actual. Maybe third example might be there might be some additional dimensional data like employee salaries. I could then take both budget and or actual, but more common on the budget side, including some maybe revenue and cost of goods sold information down to the vendor or customer, a couple of those keywords. I'm going to close the report window. That was maybe my segue into seeing how this budget data got populated. And what I'll begin with is providing a little bit of food for thought on a couple of your different input definitions. I'm going to start with a more common one, this budget. I'm again the administrator, so I have the ability to see this master line set that every company or department are using, maybe a master column that has 12 months of my budget, including maybe some prior actuals or budget for comparison purposes. And in addition to what's called the master or default line set, you'll hear me just repeat a couple of things, one being overrides, because when I pull up Department 200, which is our sales department, they're going to use a different line set that's geared and tailored to them. Like additionally, we have maybe different industries we've deployed this in, like I can almost name healthcare, law, manufacturing, education, nonprofit. So we have a few separate examples for that, but I'll just keep today's illustration very simple. I'm going to focus primarily on a sales-driven line set. So once again, I pull up Department 200, you're going to see a different template or line set being used. Let me begin by opening up two departments that are using our master line set. When I click on the Open Input button, I'll open up two departments to begin with, like Administration Department 100. I'll call that Department A. And then once this screen renders, you're simply going to see expense accounts only, meaning some of our revenue and cost of goods sold accounts start with our 4,000 and 5,000 series accounts here. So here's our first account for salaries. Now what's nice is I have the cookie cutter approach, meaning one line set shared by all. In other words, I'm avoiding Excel hell. I'm now opening up Department B, which I'll call Department 300 for marketing. And yes, these two are using that same master line set, which we generically named input. If I pulled up a 5th, 6th, or 100 different departments, they yet might share just that one line set. The system automatically consolidates all that data. In our trees, there's that one default tree called all, which automatically gets created, automatically gets maintained as you have new locations, new companies, new departments coming on. I'm just going to paraphrase some of these key concepts from prior sessions or maybe educations that you've attended here. And now third and finally, at least for comparison and contrast, I'll now open up the input screen for our third sales department. You're going to see a completely different template look and feel. And then in addition, you're going to see what we call sort of drivers or statistics. So whenever I see working with clients, they have $1 million they enter into an account, I usually have more questions than answers. Like, okay, what is the buildup of that? So here in our simplified example, we have there in a gray shade, any color coding you could really use. I'm indicating calculated lines like account 4900 for revenue motors. I like to color code that, maybe in a gray shade. That means, hey, stay away from that. I've then created some additional statistical accounts like Z101 or Z102, respective for units and price. And perhaps then you or your end users who do budgeting perhaps might key into these drivers, which calculate then your account. Now, one quick little Excel hell correlation. If I had 10 different sales locations that I might want to budget for, which in our true MSX group and company, we have something similar, that in the Excel world, you might have 10 Excel files or individual Excel sheets. Times this one line, I might have 12 formulas. So let's say 12 sales location or departments. times 12 formulas, and that might be hundreds of Excel formulas. Versus if I open up the line set in the Prospero world, instead of hundreds of Excel formulas, I simply have one. So here's my general ledger account for 4,900 for revenue motors, equaling what I'll call basically units times price. And now a key concept today is just familiarizing yourself with formulas, which are accountant friendly, super easy, and really the only or single primary rule is your formula will have your code in square brackets. So here's my formula. I'm just taking units Z101 times Z102. Now a little later, I'm going to look at this one a little bit further. But for right now, and a majority of your formulas, mainly only needed on the budgeting side, because usually for all of my actual reports, I do not need formulas. Instead, we leverage our summary accounts, like total revenue or total expense, where we expand and avoid any maintenance or updates to our line sets. Now, a couple of key things would be in this field here. We're going to see what are called qualifiers, because when I toggled between Department A and B, they all shared the same line set, therefore maybe share the same formula. But I can say, nope, perhaps I only want Company 1 this formula applied to. Or maybe for a certain location, which I'll get to this field a little bit later, but I want to introduce it right now. Let's now take one step back here, and let's show you how simply we can add these statistics in the system. Like these general ledger accounts, yes, they are normally read automatically from your general ledger database. I'm showing you now this natural account pick list, where here might be a graphical view of such, but sometimes I might favor a list view of those. Because here, for an example, are all my 6 prefix expense accounts automatically read from the general ledger. And now let's take a side step. Let's look briefly here under segments. Now in our general ledger demonstration database, we have a main or natural account for our revenue, expense, and balance sheet. We secondly have location and third department. So in our general ledger, we might only have these 3 segments. But notice for any of you that are multi-company, and if so, what Prospero does is it creates this, what I sort of call a virtual segment that you can then easily slice and dice on. I'm now opening up the company. So how about in one of my Microsoft systems like Great Plains, Exact, and Division, Solomon, where I could rattle off maybe 20 or 30 other general ledgers we're integrate with. Yeah, these might be automatically read from the general ledger. Now, one quick example was I had an earlier session where we talked about multi-companies, consolidation, and secondly, elimination. What I did on the fly, and I could do right now, is I could click on this insert button and I could create a new company here in literally seconds. Maybe this example might be twofold. It might be, hey, how about, first of all, one step back, how about these 3 of my companies? Yes, these are general ledger integrated Prospero companies where I'd have to touch and do nothing out of the box. Now, one example of a couple would be on this elimination. I had a customer that were doing eliminations manually offline in Excel. So we added this new sort of default company in Prospero, and we loaded data using Excel import. Super easy by accountants for accountants. We did not need IT. We loaded just a handful of elimination entries manually through Excel. Second example, I had a more elaborate elimination customer that we read maybe directly from some other different third-party database. It might have been a sales system, a job system, so I could probably rattle off 10, 15, 20 other examples that we've done some little one-offs for customers based on what data they need to automatically link to. So that was one of my bullet points, using dimensions and dimension members to your example. So this was just talking about the companies. I'll shed a light on a few others in just a minute. And let me even take a look now at what I call our overall segment definition. So this icon here in the background, I'll quote again, natural, location, and department. These 3 bottom ones, yes, are the only ones I have in my general ledger. Prospero, again, automatically created this company dimension that we see there in the background if you're multi-company. And then during the initial design and implementation phase of Prospero, we will ask as a consultant, like I and others here on our team, what are some of your needs and requirements? Where what we've done in a few instances is we've turned on an additional segment. This might be something like the product, which might not be a general ledger segment, but maybe you heavily report off of that, maybe heavily budget off of it so much that it was worthy to have its own dimension we created. I might not have actuals there, or you might have a third-party database where we grabbed actuals. So thinking outside the box, usually we're able to meet whatever need and requirement that you have. So there's an additional example of implementations we've done where we added a non-GL segment, I'm calling that. Now, how about third and finally, and also the more common example that I'm going to return back to, and maybe a visual to that, is these are again my revenue expenses, like 2 revenue accounts I'm highlighting, and I just created some new statistical accounts to capture some additional data, what I call again drivers. I'm going to come back. I'm purposely maybe closing and re-entering some areas. I'm going to come back here to segments, natural, like our main account. Once again, excuse the repetition, these are automatically read from the general ledger. However, there might be instances where, hey, I don't want to go through all the rigmarole and painful setup in my GL. And here, literally in seconds, like I'm going to now literally do, I'm going to create a new statistic 105. And how about let's call that Derek units to be something a little bit different. And then over here to the right, we have nice accounting logic embedded in the system of this account type field, like some revenue expense, asset liability with their correct debit and credit. And many of your general ledgers we interface with, these would be account categories we automatically read from your general ledger, like cash, receivables, payables. But for this item, I'll define it as a statistic, like sometimes we also use the none type to do so. Statistic and none is basically just a debit account. I really don't need a debit and credit like I do on revenue expense or balance sheet items, so I'll just use statistic or none. Now, as I save this, let me do one other quick thing related to that. I'm going to come here to our company one more time. I'll pick on it. This time I will save it. How about we're thinking about acquiring a new company, or it could be a new location field office I'm proposing opening up. Now, literally, with just 1 second of adding that new company, I'm going to come back to my original budget screen. This also could be to my report. And I'm now going to come up here and open this up. And what in Excel would have taken me hours to create new sheets, linking to that new file and cells, I now literally in seconds, as I'm now going full circle, I'm coming now to this company field, choosing the new company, and literally in seconds I can start budgeting to it. And then additionally, if I go to report, our reports use those trees. And then I'm going to open up the tree called all, just to, again, confirm. Now here, trees on the company segment. This tree all automatically created, automatically maintained. So without me, I did not have to do anything. It's now here. And if I open up a report looking at all companies, ta-da, it's automatically consolidated. So that's going to save you huge time, effort, and pain points that in the Excel world you're coming from. All right, so that might be multifaceted, new companies, new location, new departments. Now let me continue with the accounts, like good old units and price that I could add this to. I'm basically going to go back to my line set that I was in here. Bear with me just a second here. I'll get one window out of my way that the GoToMeeting had in front of me here. Now, as I'm multitasking sometimes in some of these sessions here, I have several tabs that you see open here. And if I wanted to see an inventory, the different ones that I have out there, well, by all means, here is maybe my line set, maybe my budget input for sales, like you see the text at the very end, marketing or administration. And I'm going to go back to my line set for my sales override. Like there in the background was the expense one that did not have revenue, cost of goods sold, nor these statistics. And again, this was my override. Now, if I were to add a new account to the system, I could individually bring in one or multiple accounts all in one fell swoop using this build button. I'm just going to type in a search of the Z, and then here I have my 105 here toward the very end. So now I can start budgeting and utilizing that further in the formula. But I'll probably stop my keystrokes there, but there's how I can easily add the system, and this could then be used for multiple responsibility centers, I'll generically call it, like company, department, locations that might share this line set. Let me circle back. This again was our default line set called lines, generic one called input. That is the master default one. Now here on the overrides tab, if I wanted to add a new override, I could simply come here on the home ribbon. I have this insert button, and then maybe I have a new area in my organization using maybe a new line set that I tailored for them. Now, speaking of these overrides, they could be very granular, meaning an individual company, individual location, etc. But many times they might be a collective group. Like looking at this location, we're using a summary node called total region, where in our list view, you see summary versus maybe posting that I have in the general ledger. But let me also use a tree to sort of look at that total region. So it might be looking at our different divisions. Maybe it's only my sales divisions instead of total region. That might be using this one line set, which sure, I'll just go full circle with this example. So I just now changed it. Instead of every location, I said just the sales location using the sales line set or something similar. Maybe this group of people via my tree, maybe the same one, might be my service group using a different line override for their budget data entry. All right, so I don't tamper too much with this database here. I'm going to close without saving most of the examples I did. Let me just start anew. Now, one of the largest costs, continue with this driver-based theme, is going to be HR related, headcount, units sold, and then that will segue back to some of my other more precise formulas and different looks and feels of my budget screen we have now the flexibility for. I'm a little hand-bound as I'm thinking about past years with Microsoft Forecaster, where we've greatly improved Prospero to have great flexibility on your budget design screens. So how about just a quick little 3 to 5 minute? I want to show you maybe 2 or 3 different flavors of input screens. Well, the one we're currently looking at, let me just talk a little bit further to it. Like gray shade, perhaps you stay away from, because here under maybe my file and options, I can come up here and say, all right, certain colors, like any calculated lines, maybe I want to put in a gray shade, just like some other color settings we have the ability for. So I call that the colors of the rainbow as you prefer, and that'll be good hand holding and identifiers for you and others. Furthermore, looking at our columns, I might have these months, January through December. Those are my budgeted months. And then for nice comparison purposes, I'm showing some prior actuals and variances to help guide myself and my users so they're not blindly doing so. We have good old line item detail where I can take maybe travel or tuition out further. I can add annotations or notes behind this, which again, that's going to be reserved for maybe a future session. But I'm just going to show you via this little check mark that, hey, I can quickly see who added what little footnotes to what accounts and with what line items there in green. There's also audit trail history. I can see who changed an account balance and when. So this button right here, or just maybe about 4 to 5 bullet points we take our time with on a slightly different high-level budget devoted session, but worth a minute or two. There's now audit history. I'm seeing which user, what date, changed the value from what to when. Great. Those are all the bells and whistles. I probably don't have time to share more, but there's a couple of key ones there. This is what I'm going to call my plain Jane vanilla screen. But how about during some of the different world we are in these today, I want now, after the first few months here, I want to reforecast the remaining year. So after 25 years helping clients with their budgeting reporting, some good trends that I see is instead of just budgeting once a year, they're budgeting more than once, maybe quarterly, even monthly. So if they have Prospero, you can easily and efficiently do that versus Excel hell. Second good trend is obviously using driver base like I'm talking about now. I'll be adding more to that here throughout the last half hour. And third is balance sheet and cash flow, which I'm going to open up here in just a second. But the second example might be for a forecast. What I did was I opened this up for July, period 7, or whatever your fiscal year is. Automatically, we're grabbing actuals through July. If I were to come up here and open this for maybe August, then a new column of actual would show, and then they budget out the remaining months because we can tell the system, hey, only show actuals that are less than equal to my report date, or vice versa for budget. Different day for that column design, but very easy. I'll have 12 months actual, 12 months budget, and just use some conditional suppressing, less than equal to base report date. Okay, great. This might be some past looking actuals, forward looking. Now, speaking of forward looking, headed forecast might be the remaining months of this year, but another good trend that I'm seeing is multi-year planning, where how about I want you, my budgeters, to budget out the remaining months of this year, but give me a high level estimate for what I'll call year 2 or 3, like 21 and 22 in this example. You could even break it out by month or quarter, but I just want you to just enter an annual figure. So another example to how your columns could be flexible based on what time, actual forecast months or years you wish. Third example, I'm now going to open up the balance sheet and cash flow. As they say, cash is king maybe in this day and age. Now, maybe two high-level differences as I'm opening up this balance sheet. One would be I usually, in my balance sheet, do it at a high level, maybe only at the company level, meaning not by location and department. Second, maybe key difference is I oftentimes would have a different column that would have a beginning balance column, as you see here to the left. That's my starting point. And maybe third difference is I'm maybe in a corporate department, like department 100 here at the very end, and this corporate department might have expenses, but this line set used for my balance sheet input definition, because it has a different column and a different line set for my corporate department, versus this budget might have revenue expenses in it for the same corporate department, just using a different line set or override. Now this screen might be a couple fold. One is I'm now going to transition to what we call a lookup formula. I'm going to provide a couple examples to such. One would be on this net income, or shall I say balance sheet we're currently in. I want to look up all of my budgeted income across all my location departments. So this is what we call a lookup row. Notice here to the left, I'm looking up this account called TNet, just like I'm looking up all my one prefix accounts for my asset additions, which might be budgeted on the capital detail screen. Or maybe third example might be in my statement of cash flow, I might have a line above where my salaries I expense, and for cash budgeting, I do that the same month it's budgeted, but I might have bonus or depreciation that I might look up and bring in a different line because that might have a different cash impact up above on some maybe different formula line. Receivables, maybe a driver example, I'm not going to get into the detail now, I'll give you a different one, is maybe receivable, I want to create a statistic for the days sales outstanding or days payable outstanding for accounts payable. Let's now take a closer look at this net income lookup. Again, I'm in a single location department, but really down below, I'm looking up every location, every department, and this account called TNet is all my revenue expenses. So I'm now going to open up the line set. First thing I'll highlight and emphasize is our segments that usually you have included in your screen, the line set that I'm in. I'm pulling out the properties. Rarely do I need to adjust or look to these, but you see currently, and let me thumbtack that. Currently, the line set has the natural segment only in it, meaning our good old revenue expense, or in this case, balance sheet items here. Now notice you see it where it says filter defined. Now temporarily, and just for this net income look example, I'm going to more narrowly focus is, I turned on temporarily the location and department. I could have also done company as well, but I'm focusing on just a single company's balance sheet for right now. And furthermore, let's look at this line here. Let me minimize the properties, give us a little bit more real estate room to work with. And over here to the left, this is what we call our navigation pane, like the lines I'm in or the budget input. I can also minimize it. We have a little check mark here to the right. Look up, that means basically I'm not doing data entry directly to this line. I want to look up data from another. Now, respectively, let me quote that out one more time. These are easy, meaning here's the default all location, automatically maintained, automatically updated. So I'm looking up all locations and all departments data, but here for the account TNet. And that's one of the great favorite features in the earlier session today I did of both the reporting and budgeting side is where we use summary accounts. Here we're looking at net income, which might roll up expenses and profit. Profit might be rolling up COGS and revenue. And then on our budget input that I began with for our sales and G&A departments where we're looking at expenses, I could have had one single summary account in their line set using the summary account where I expand to show all the individual accounts. Which phrased another way, if I add new expense account, I do not have to update my roll-up tree, nor I do not have to update the line set if I'm using the summary account expanding like the first few expense only screens did do so. All right, so there's our first example of doing a little lookup formula. Let me now close out a couple of these screens. I'll pull up another example of a lookup here a little bit later, but what I want to additionally do is another example too of input screens. Primarily, I was looking at a bottoms up type approach on most of the earlier screens, but many times I might do what I call a top down screen. This third or fourth example of a different input definition. Now notice when I open this up, you might have different dimensionality you're asked for or maybe not. Notice here when I open up this input, I was not asked for the company, secondly location, nor the department. The reason why is because I already have those predefined. Notice in my line set for this demonstration company to familiarize yourself a little bit with their numbering scheme, I do not have in my line set my good old revenue expenses, nor I do not have my balance sheet accounts. What these are my different departments. So instead of me going in Department A screen or Department B screen, maybe I want to essentially do input by having maybe departments in the lines. Earlier I exampled or spoke of maybe the summary account expenses, and before this row showing every individual expenses and expanding that summary account of total expenses. Let's look briefly at this line set. Super easy, super efficient, and zero maintenance needed. The line set, first of all, does not have the natural account, which most do. So I turn that off because once I take you back to the column, we have our column, a column with revenue or a column with expenses. And I turned on department. I'm using this default all tree, automatically created, maintained as new departments get added. And I'm basically expanding above to show all the individual departments, meaning 0 levels, each individual one. Or sometimes I might say 1 level down, which might be maybe a regional group of my departments that I have. Or 2 levels down might be districts, based on how you have your different levels of your tree. Okay, let me close out this line set. A little bit out of the norm, but super easy to create and do data entry on one screen. Now, further looking at the columns. Now, in this particular example, I'm not really concerned with the different months of the year. I just want at high level, me keying in some data. So it's very common for some industries like government, nonprofit, where they might just key in some annual figures, and then behind the scenes, I'm spreading this out evenly. I have hidden some monthly columns. I'm just taking sales divided by 12. And I'm going to save some of those clicks, but I'll just paraphrase some of that. But key thing here is, yep, there's my sales filter, cost of goods sold, and margin. We have another session sort of devoted to some of this here. All right, let me now return. I want to look closer at one more lookup example before we start winding down within the next 20 minutes, and also field a few minutes for question and answer. I want to look at lookups one more time, qualified formulas, and single cell. Now this is the budget screen I started with. Notice when I open it up versus the last one I was not asked for any of my dimensions since they were all prior and all defined. But I'm going to open up the good old administration from before. Like I created those accounts like Z105 today, a statistical account for Derek's unit. You're going to see here at the very bottom another statistic or driver that I have that I commonly see is maybe the working days per month. Now I can easily import this if I have this statistic that's needed across multiple location departments, but this is what I'm going to call a global assumption or a global driver that I might key in or import just to one spot. Meaning again, I'm in maybe 4100, that location, and good old administration department 100, that maybe me, Derek, is the accounting department. Sometimes even like I created a new dummy company. Sometimes even I create a new dummy department called ZZZ, where I might enter all my statistics globally and then have them look up. Okay. Now here, just to repeat and clarify, I'm entering these days only in one spot, this one corporate department that I'm in, and I'm using this one statistical account called WDPM, or any ID that you wish. And again, I like using alphas that differentiate from my numeric ones. A second one, rate. Perhaps this one I do not want to enter globally because maybe I want location 1 Denver to have a different rate than maybe location 2 San Francisco. Or if not, I could key in the global driver here, or maybe even have 2 rows, what I call rate 1 for Denver region, or I could have created a second account rate 2 for San Francisco and still centrally enter it that maybe 20 different Denver and San Francisco locations might reference this one screen. Once again, before I leave away from it, this is 4100, 100, where I'm centrally entering data. Now, if I come up here and open the input, let's see here. Doesn't really matter who I pull up here. Let me just open up 3100. That's one of our San Francisco locations. And long story short, that you're probably going to expect to see is, yes, I'm looking up that global rate that I entered in that prior screen. Down here is that same instance. Let's look one more time to the line set. But now the second or third time we've seen it, it'll be that much more comfortable and familiar. I'm going to minimize the navigation pane to the left. Let's look briefly at the property. Usually I only have the natural account. That's the most common and flexible one. And then that way you're prompted for the company location department when you're doing data entry. But notice where it said filter defined. I'm going to turn those back on. And down here, I have the same type of days account and looked up from that earlier single location department. Okay. Now notice this formula as I'm going to take one next step further. So that's the global days. Notice this formula currently in this formula window, it does not have any qualifiers to it. What I'm now going to do is I'll say just for my San Francisco locations, I only want this formula to apply to because maybe both Denver and San Francisco share the same line set and therefore share the same formula, but maybe that's not my intent. Well, one thing is I could create 2 different line sets and therefore 2 different formulas for Denver and San Francisco, but many times I don't need that, where I'm going to leverage and take advantage of this qualifier field. So one thing I want to emphasize is I want to again restrict this formula just to my San Francisco or some region. So what I'm now doing is I'm looking at our location. Usually only have one or a couple of trees. I'm going to focus on this region one, and then our San Francisco was in this west region. So in my qualifier formula, I'm going to say this group of people, and normally I have my tree that's using a range, a wildcard or range, so I don't have to maintain my tree, but here is where San Francisco I'm going to return to. And then I'm going to say the formula could be just a single San Francisco service location qualified and only applies to. But nope, I'm going to say all of the West region this formula applies to. Okay, so let me close this out. I'm going to come back in here. I'll just say, hey, for all companies, location 3000, department all, or it could be an individual sales department, but the key thing here is I'm only restricting it to my West 3000 group of people or locations. Whenever I turn on these filters like temporarily location department, keyword there temporarily, I always want to make sure I turn those off, because if I forget to, and if I reopen my input, you would not be prompted for the location department. That would be your first clue that, oops, I forgot to turn these off, because I want to select my single location or department. All right, I'm just going to save and close that line set. I'll open up San Francisco one more time. This is Denver, where maybe the formula does not apply to, only applies to the San Francisco or West region 3000 and group of people beneath. So let me open up one final time, maybe those two different ones, meaning first of all, San Francisco, that yes, it does apply to. And then I think I typed, I think I did 4 digits instead of 5 digits. So that was my typo here. Excuse me, as I'm thinking of too many customers and too many IDs. So let me quickly correct that. All right, you might have just saw, I just used a keyboard shortcut icon to open up the line set, just like this icon here can open up the line set. All right, already been a long day, waking up at around 5 a.m. Pacific time with a few calls and people, so excuse that typo. Here's my formula and qualifier. Notice here, it did not recognize it. That's my clue that I probably should have reopened this to illustrate it. But now, if I come up here, that was an extra line I did not intend. And once again, if I close and re-enter, it did take and accept it. It recognizes this as a valid location. Okay. Let me now just save and close. And then finally, I'm just going to open up for maybe the San Francisco, where yes, you'll see the formula applied to, maybe Denver, where it's not. That's the big grand finale, which might not be the huge bang for the buck as I gave the punchline away. All right, so just to do one or two last clicks, then I'll look to the question log with our last 10 or so minutes remaining, see if any came in, if I can field. So please do enter in the questionnaire the GoToWebinar control panel. If not, I'll pull up my email as maybe some little takeaways I'll further provide. Okay, I'm just going to enter some rate. Okay, depending on if you have automatic calculations turned on or off inside your system like Excel does, you'll see then that value where, yeah, I'm in San Francisco, where yes, that does apply, but then if I pulled up Denver, it does not. And sometimes even I can suppress lines with no values or not. This rate, yes, I entered at the individual, maybe site level, but maybe again, it's global like my days. And finally, let me click this button here called Reopen Input. I'll go back to a Denver where that formula does not apply to. It's your choice of whether or not you want to even hide some of these assumptions or drivers, but right now I'm showing most of them. So and long story short, again, this formula does not apply to any Denver. Notice the color coding. That's your first little giveaway that, yeah, in the San Francisco, this is gray, locked from input, not yes, applicable to San Francisco. but here in Denver, not. So simple qualified format. I don't need separate line sets, but yes, maybe I need them. And let me open up one last little food for thought. I've been pulling up what I call true general ledger departments. I gave a couple examples that sometimes I create a dummy fictitious department based on some little requirements and questions we ask. So what I did was I actually have this one dummy department called products. And maybe it's different users that key in different drivers, like maybe my sales person does sales drivers in one dummy sales department that does not exist in my GL. Maybe the manufacturing person puts their manufacturing standards in maybe a dummy manufacturing department that might flow to multiple manufacturing departments. So this example is taking it one step further, where here I have additional accounts, or it could have been a new segment on the product, but I'm mainly just using additional accounts. Like here is product 10, like an A suffix I use for units, or maybe a B suffix I'm using for price, where I'm calculating not only revenue, but maybe they key in $1 per unit cost of goods sold, or maybe a margin cost. But there's some additional accounts and or an additional product dimension. Maybe during the initial implementation we could add. All right, thank you. Hopefully that gives you some additional insight on some screens. I'm going to come into the question area, see if any came through a queue. Many times people are a little shy and just absorbing this information. I don't see any currently in the queue. So how about as I'll start to wind down then. First and foremost, just want to share my contact information again. So if you do have any follow-up questions, possibilities are endless. There's my email of derek.krebs@msxgroup.com. Additionally, like you're maybe attending today's webinar live or via recording, I want to personally invite you. Twice a year, we have our user group forum. So next week on September 22nd and 23rd, we have 2 full days, meaning approximately 7 or 8 hour day. The first day is on the Microsoft stack of those what I call legacy older products of Manager, Porter, and Forecaster that we still support hundreds of people, even on FRX that's not listed here. So always glad to help you on that regard. And then secondly, on the second day, the 23rd of September, we're going to have a Prospero focused day. These are all free, live, real time. Come with all your questions. If not, we're going to record them, and they're also CPE credit eligible. So nice little takeaway. So I'll say again, a big thank you for joining us today, and hopefully we'll see you at an upcoming webinar or forum. Have a good rest of your day, and thanks for joining us. Goodbye.